Chapter 1: The Concrete Sarcophagus. The air in the silo tasted of cold stone and forgotten time. Dr. Mara Ivy ran a gloved hand along the weeping concrete of the launch duct wall, her fingers tracing a hairline fracture. It was inert, a fossil of stress from half a century ago when the structure first settled into the Kansas bedrock. Her headlamp cut a clean, white circle through the gloom, illuminating mineral deposits which glittered like a rash of diamonds. Below her, the silo plunged into a 900-foot abyss of engineered darkness. "She's solid," Mara announced, her voice a sterile clip in the immense quiet. "The spalling is superficial. Rebar integrity is nominal for a structure of this age." She made a note on her tablet. The screens glow a small rectangle of modernity in the Cold War tomb. A gruff sound came from behind her. "You can run your scans, Doc. I'm telling you, this place has bad bones." Ben Carter stood near the massive, two-story blast door, his own headlamp beam painting a wider, yellower cone of light. He was a thick-set man, his face a roadmap of hard-earned wrinkles, his presence as solid as the concrete under his steel-toed boots. He slapped a heavy palm against the steel of the door. The resulting boom echoed down, 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 a sound swallowed by the vertical emptiness. "Bones are my specialty, Ben," Mara said without turning. "Stress tolerance, tensile strength, aggregate composition. I don't see anything here my instruments can't quantify. Some things you can't measure with a gizmo." He walked over, his boots crunching on flakes of rust and dust. He pointed his light not at the wall but at the empty space in the center of the silo. "My granddad worked the pour on this hole, lost a man on level 7, a blowout, decompression. They said the pressure shot him right out of his boots, never found much of him to bury." "Construction accidents were common in projects of this scale," Mara countered, her focus still on her work. She was here to assess the silo's viability for a client with more money than sense who wanted to turn it into a luxury, apocalyptic hotel. Ben was the foreman for the potential demolition and renovation, a man who operated on anecdote and intuition. Mara operated on data. "This wasn't common," Ben pressed, his voice lowering. "They sealed the level, poured concrete over the whole mess. Granddad said for months after, the other crews swore they could hear a man screaming from inside the walls. A high, thin sound like air leaking from a pinhole." Mara finally turned, pulling her safety goggles up onto her helmet. "Ben, with all due respect, I am here to produce a geological and structural survey. I can't include ghost stories in my report. Call it what you want. A place where 50 men lived for years, fingers on a button which could end the world. It leaves a mark, a stain. You can't pressure wash a stain like that away." A third voice, young and irritatingly enthusiastic, bounced off the walls. "Yo, the resonance in here is sick. You guys getting this?" Cody Finch, a lanky kid in his early 20s, stood at the edge of the gantry, a GoPro camera strapped to his chest and another mounted on his helmet. He was the client's nephew, a social media influencer tasked with generating viral marketing buzz. He spoke into a small microphone clipped to his jacket. "What's up, Legion? We are live from inside a genuine Titan II missile silo. This is where they kept the big one, the planet killer. Hit that subscribe button because we are going deep." Mara pinched the bridge of her nose. The client insisted Cody be allowed on the initial survey. It was a compromise she regretted with every vapid syllable he uttered. "Stay away from the edge, kid," Ben grumbled, his dislike for the boy palpable. "All good, big guy, I'm clipped in." Cody leaned over the railing, aiming his helmet cam straight down. "It's like the throat of some giant metal beast, for real." A fourth person, Pippa Moss, Mara's intern, approached quietly. She held a clipboard, her eyes wide with a mixture of academic curiosity and raw awe. "Dr. Ivy, the atmospheric sensors are showing elevated radon levels on the lower floors, consistent with the geological survey, but we should probably limit exposure past level 3 today." "Good work, Pip," Mara said, grateful for the return to professionalism. "We're only going down to the LCC today, level 2, the brains of the operation." The personnel lift was a rusted cage, barely large enough for the four of them. Ben operated the controls with a practiced hand, and with a groan of protesting metal they began their descent. The concrete walls slid past, a blur of gray uniformity broken by stenciled numbers marking each level. Light from the surface vanished, replaced by the intersecting beams of their headlamps and the dim, caged bulb of the elevator. The temperature dropped with every foot they descended. "They say the guys stationed here, the missileers, they'd go squirrely," Ben said, his voice a low rumble over the screech of the lift's winch. "Two guys locked in the control center for 24-hour shifts, never saw the sun. The only color down here was government tissue green and red buttons. The quiet would get to them, or the hum. The constant hum of the air recyclers and the electronics, the sound of their own blood in their ears." "Psychological stress in confined environments is well documented," Mara stated, though even she felt a prickle of unease. The sheer weight of the earth above them was a physical presence. The lift shuddered to a halt at level 2. A short, graded walkway led to another blast door, this one smaller. A stenciled sign read, "Launch Control Center, No Loan Zone." Ben pushed it open. It wasn't locked. The air that billowed out was colder still, thick with the smell of ozone and decaying plastic. The Launch Control Center, the LCC, was a circular room suspended from the main silo wall by massive shock absorbers designed to let it survive a nearby nuclear blast. Two command chairs, their green vinyl cracked and faded, faced a sweeping console of buttons, switches, and dead screens. "Whoa," Cody breathed, sweeping his camera across the scene. "This is the spot. This is where they would have turned the keys." Pip stepped inside, her reverence for the history almost religious. She gently touched the surface of the console. "It's all here. The emergency war order checklists, the launch sequence indicators." Mara began her own work, running a portable scanner over the support struts connecting the LCC to the silo wall. Everything was over-engineered, built with a paranoid redundancy. This place was designed to endure the apocalypse. It was Ben who noticed it first. He had walked to the far side of the LCC, near a heavy grate which covered a sump pump access point. He knelt, his head cocked. "You guys hear that?" he asked, his voice tight. Mara paused her scan. Cody stopped his narration. In the sudden silence there was a new sound, distinct from the drip of seepage or the hum of their equipment. It was a low, deep groan. It seemed to come not from any direction but from the very structure around them, a sound of immense pressure. Sub-level machinery, probably, Mara said, though she had no conviction. Hydrostatic pressure in the sump. The groan intensified, joined by a high-pitched metallic shriek. The entire LCC capsule vibrated, a low-frequency tremor which vibrated up through the soles of their boots. Dust rained down from the ceiling. "What the hell is that?" Cody stammered, his bravado gone. "Get to the lift," Ben commanded, his hand already on Pip's shoulder, pulling her toward the door. "Now." Mara grabbed her gear. The vibration was escalating into a violent shudder. A spiderweb of cracks appeared on one of the thick plexiglass windows which looked out into the main silo. Then came the roar. It was not a sound they heard with their ears, but with their entire bodies. A deep, tectonic bellow which came from below, from the bottom of the silo. It was the sound of a catastrophic failure, of a dam bursting, of a mountain breaking in half. Before they could make it to the walkway, a geyser of brown, frothing water erupted from the sump grate. It hit the ceiling with the force of a fire hose, spraying the room with icy, muddy liquid. The lights on their helmets flickered as they were drenched. "The shaft," Ben roared over the din. "Something let go in the shaft." Mara looked through the observation window. The clean, white beam of her headlamp illuminated an impossible sight. A solid wall of churning, debris-filled water was rising up the silo shaft at an incredible speed. It wasn't a leak. It was an invasion. The silo was filling like a test tube. The water hit the LCC level with the force of a freight train. The entire capsule screamed and bucked on its shock absorbers. The plexiglass window didn't crack. It imploded, showering the room with sharp, heavy shards. A torrent of water blasted into the control center, knocking them from their feet. Mara was slammed against the launch console, the impact driving the air from her lungs. The water was colder than anything she had ever experienced, a shocking, paralyzing cold which stole her breath and her strength. She was underwater, tumbling in a chaos of swirling mud and equipment ripped from the walls. Her helmet was torn from her head. Her world was a maelstrom of black water and roaring pressure. Her training kicked in, a detached part of her brain fighting the panic. Orient yourself, find up. She couldn't tell which way was which. The current was too strong. Her lungs burned, a desperate, fiery agony. Black spots danced in her vision. Just as her consciousness began to fade, a powerful hand clamped onto the collar of her jumpsuit and pulled. She was dragged through the churning water, her body scraping against mangled steel. They broke the surface with a collective, desperate gasp. She was in a small, shrinking air pocket at the very top of the LCC, her back pressed against the curved ceiling. Ben held her, his face a mask of grim determination in the single, flickering beam of his helmet lamp, the only light which survived. Cody was there too, sputtering and choking, his eyes wide with terror. The water was still pouring in, the roar deafening. The air pocket shrank with every second. "The door," Ben yelled, his voice hoarse. "It's our only chance." He shoved Mara toward the LCC's main door, which led back to the elevator shaft. It was their only way out of the capsule, but the water on the other side in the main silo was higher. The pressure holding it shut would be immense. Ben and Mara put their shoulders to it. Cody, shocked into action, joined them. They pushed with all their strength. The metal door groaned, unmoving. The water in the LCC was at their chests now, rising fast. The ceiling was just a few feet above their heads. Again, Ben bellowed. They heaved, their muscles screaming in protest. The door moved. An inch. A jet of water shot through the gap with the force of a pressure washer. With a final, agonized shriek of metal, the door burst open, and the water equalized with a violent surge. They were flushed out of the LCC and into the vast, black expanse of the main silo shaft. Mara was submerged again, but this time the current was less violent. She kicked toward the surface, her lungs screaming. Her head broke into open air. She gasped, treading water in the absolute darkness. "Ben," she screamed, "Cody." Here, Ben's voice was close. His light flickered on, a pathetic beacon in the colossal dark. It revealed a horrifying new reality. They were floating in the middle of the silo, now a vertical lake. The water level was 30 feet below the surface. The elevator was gone, ripped from its moorings. There was no way up. "Cody," Mara yelled, her voice echoing strangely. There was a splash nearby. "Help me, my leg. I think it's broken." Ben swam toward the sound, his light bobbing. It found Cody clinging to a piece of floating debris, his face pale with pain and shock. Mara's mind raced, trying to process the scale of the disaster. An underground river, a burst aquifer. It didn't matter. The silo, their concrete tomb, was now a concrete aquarium. A fourth voice was missing. "Pip," Mara called out, her own voice trembling. "Pippa." There was no answer, only the gentle lapping of water against the cold concrete walls and the drip, drip, drip from the distant, unseen ceiling. They were alive. They were trapped. And they were not alone in the water. She did not know how she was so certain of this last part, but the conviction was a cold, solid weight in her gut. The silo was no longer empty. Chapter 2: The Black Baptism. The darkness was a physical entity. It had weight and texture, a smothering quality amplified by the deadening acoustics of the water. Ben's headlamp was a fragile spear of light against an infinite ocean of black. It cut across the churning surface, revealing a surface littered with the flotsam of their world. Shattered pieces of catwalk, twisted electrical conduits, and the single white dot of Pip's abandoned safety helmet, bobbing gently, upside down. "The light," Mara gasped, her teeth chattering from a cold which had settled deep in her bones. "Keep it on me. I'm going to check Cody." She swam the short distance to the kid, her movements clumsy in the waterlogged jumpsuit. Cody was clinging to a large section of the elevator cage, his face a mess of terror and pain. His left leg was twisted at an unnatural angle below the knee. "Don't move it," Mara instructed, her voice taking on a clinical tone she did not feel. It was a shield. "Compound fracture, most likely. We need to immobilize it." "Immobilize it with what?" Cody spat, his voice a panicked squeak. "With wishes. We're going to die here." "Shut up, kid," Ben growled, his light steady on the injury. You're alive, work with that. He unclipped a heavy-duty wrench from his tool belt. Doc, you need something for a splint. Anything straight, Mara replied, her mind sifting through first aid protocols. A piece of that conduit, we'll need to strap it, belts, strips of clothing. The immediate task provided a fragile anchor against the overwhelming despair. Working together, they managed to fashion a crude splint for Cody's leg, binding 2 lengths of metal to his shin with their belts. The boy screamed when they set it, a raw, piercing sound which echoed up the silo shaft and was answered only by silence. Afterward, he slumped against the wreckage, exhausted and whimpering. "Okay," Ben said, his breath plumbing in the cold air. He shone his light around the vast, circular prison. "Status check. We're on level 2, or what's left of it. The LCC is a total loss. Water's about 15 feet from the ceiling of this level. It seems stable for now. No obvious way up." "The main personnel hatch is on level 1, Mara thought aloud, her mind a frantic calculator of impossibilities. "It's a sealed blast door. Even if we could get to it, it's under at least 40 feet of floodwater on the outside. The external pressure would be astronomical. We'd never get it open." "So no way out the top," Ben stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "What about down?" "Down is 9 more levels of flooded silo, terminating in a launch pit filled with whatever this is." She gestured to the murky water. A low, rhythmic sound began to permeate the chamber. Thump, thump, thump. It was deep and resonant, a sound one felt more than heard, vibrating through the water and into their bodies. Cody flinched. "What is that?" "It's the LCC," Mara theorized, forcing her voice to remain steady. "The power console is submerged. It's short-circuiting, sending a regular pulse into the water." She needed it to be that, a logical, mechanical explanation. "Sounds like a heartbeat," Ben said quietly, and Mara hated him for giving voice to the thought which was clawing at the edge of her own reason. The pulse was too regular, too organic. It was the sound of a great, submerged heart beating in the deep. "We need to get out of the water," she said, pushing the thought away. "Hypothermia is our first enemy. We need a stable platform." She scanned the circular walls. The shock absorbers, the ones which held the LCC. Ben followed her logic instantly, swinging his light beam to the silo wall. The massive pistons and springs, each the size of a small car, were still bolted to the concrete. The LCC capsule had been torn from them, but the mounting platforms remained, about 5 feet above the current water level. A small, solid island in their vertical sea. "It's a climb," Ben said. "Kid can't make it with that leg." "You and I can," Mara insisted. "We get up there, we find a way to haul him up." It was a desperate, agonizing effort. The cold had made their limbs stiff and unresponsive. The concrete wall was slick with water and algae. Ben went first, using his brute strength and the lifetime of experience etched into his hands to find purchase. He wedged the wrench into a mounting bolt hole, using it as a handhold, and hauled his considerable weight upward. He made it, collapsing onto the greasy steel platform with a heavy grunt. He then lowered the end of his remaining belt to Mara. It was a terrifying climb. Her gloves were slick, her muscles screaming. She dangled over the black water, the rhythmic thumping from below seeming to urge her to fall, to join the cold embrace. But she held on, and Ben's powerful arms pulled her the last few feet onto the relative safety of the platform. They were out of the water, but the cold was somehow worse. The air temperature was barely above freezing, and the wind, funneled down the silo shaft, sliced through their wet clothes. Shivering violently, they huddled together, trying to devise a way to lift Cody. "We have nothing," Mara said, her voice trembling. "No rope." "My camera rig," Cody called up, his voice weak. "The safety harness. It has a tether. It's thin, but it's rated for 300 pounds. It was their only chance. Ben lay on his stomach, reaching down as Mara anchored his legs. Cody, grimacing in pain, managed to unclip the tether and toss the end up. After several attempts, Ben caught it. "Don't know if this will hold you, kid," Ben grunted, testing the thin nylon rope. "Just pull," Cody screamed, his fear overriding his pain. The process was a slow-motion nightmare. Cody was dead weight, his splinted leg banging uselessly against the concrete wall. Mara and Ben pulled together, their muscles burning, the thin rope cutting into their raw, cold hands. The boys' whimpers and moans were the only sound besides their own ragged breathing and the relentless, deep heartbeat from the abyss. They got him halfway up when a new sound joined the symphony. A strange, wet, ripping noise. It came from the water, somewhere near the floating wreckage where Cody had been. Ben paused, his head cocked. What was that? He shone the headlamp down. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the debris. At first there was nothing. Then the wreckage shifted. Something was moving underneath it. A long, dark shape, no thicker than a power cable, snaked out from under the twisted metal. It moved with an unnatural fluidity, a deliberate, questing motion. It was followed by another and another. They weren't cables. They were limbs. Mara's breath hitched in her throat. Her scientific mind, the one which categorized and explained, went blank. The thing which emerged from the water defied all categorization. Its body was a dense, central mass of what looked like corroded wiring and rusted metal, all fused together. But it was alive. From this central hub, a dozen or more long, flexible tendrils extended, each one ending in a cruel, three-fingered claw of jagged metal. It moved with a silent, spider-like grace, using its tendrils to pull its body onto the floating platform, its form barely distinguishable from the mangled equipment it crawled upon. It had no eyes, no face, but its entire body seemed to turn, to orient itself toward the three humans suspended on the wall above. "Pull," Mara whispered, the word a dry crackle in her throat. "Ben, pull now." They hauled with a desperate, adrenaline-fueled strength. Cody, seeing the creature, began to thrash and scream, a high, piercing wail of pure terror. His movement made him swing like a pendulum. The cable creeper reacted to the sound and motion. One of its tendrils shot out, impossibly fast. It was not aimed at Cody, but at the tether. The metal claw struck the taut line. There was a sharp twang as several fibers parted. "It's cutting the rope," Ben roared. They pulled harder, faster, ignoring the fire in their muscles and the screaming protest of their lungs. The creature struck again, its claw tearing at the tether. More fibers snapped. The rope groaned, stretched to its limit. With one final, synchronized heave, they dragged Cody over the edge of the platform. He collapsed in a heap, a sobbing, terrified mess. Ben scrambled over to the edge, ready to kick the creature if it tried to climb. But it didn't. It remained on the floating wreckage, its tendrils twitching. It seemed to be watching them, a patient, mechanical predator. A low, clicking sound like a dozen relays firing at once emanated from its central body. It was assessing, learning. Then, as if it had decided something, it slipped back into the water with barely a ripple, vanishing into the black. The wreckage it had been perched on bobbed in its wake. Silence descended once more, thick and heavy. The only sounds were Cody's ragged sobs, the drip of water, and the slow, steady, terrifying heartbeat of the silo. They were on a tiny island of steel, in a 9-story deep well of black water, and they had just met one of its inhabitants. Mara huddled against the cold concrete wall, her body shaking uncontrollably. Every rational explanation, every scientific principle she had ever built her life upon had been washed away in the flood. The world she understood was gone. This new world, this concrete aquarium, had its own rules, its own physics, and its own food chain, and they were no longer at the top of it. Chapter 3: The Weight of the Past. The minutes stretched into an hour. The shivering became a deep, convulsive shudder which Mara could not control. Cold was a physical thief, robbing her of dexterity, of rational thought, of hope. They huddled together for warmth on the steel platform, a miserable knot of wet clothes and chattering teeth. Ben had given Cody his heavy canvas jacket. The boy was now quiet, his shock giving way to a pale, listless torpor which worried Mara more than his screaming. "We have to move," Ben stated, his voice a low rasp. His headlamp beam, their only star in this dark universe, was beginning to flicker, its yellow light weakening. "We stay here, the cold takes us before that thing gets another chance." "Move where?" Mara's voice was brittle. "There is nowhere to go." "There's always somewhere," Ben countered, a stubborn spark in his eyes. He played the fading beam across the silo. "The water's stable. Hasn't risen an inch since we got up here. That means there's gotta be an overflow somewhere. A drain, something. Or the source of the flood has simply equalized with the water table," Mara argued. The habit of scientific debate a flimsy comfort. "Doesn't matter. What matters is a way out of this wind tunnel." His light traced the curved wall until it landed on a dark, rectangular opening about 20 feet away on their same level. Ventilation shaft. It was an intake vent, part of the silo's massive air circulation system. A concrete tunnel, maybe 4 feet square, disappearing into the wall. "It could be flooded," Mara said. "It could be dry," Ben shot back. "It's higher than the LCC, might lead up, might lead nowhere, but it's cover, and it's out of the water." The logic was undeniable. The platform was a death sentence by exposure. The tunnel was a chance. The problem was the 20 feet of open water between them and it. "The creature," Cody whispered, his eyes fixed on the black surface below. "It's a risk. Staying here is a guarantee," Ben said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll go first. I'll rig something to get you two across." He took the remains of Cody's tether and tied the wrench to one end. He swung it like a pendulum, the makeshift grappling hook clanging against the concrete wall near the vent. On the fourth try, it caught on a piece of exposed rebar. He tested the line, putting his full weight on it. It held. "All right, Doc, you're the lightest. You go next after me. I'll belay you from the other side. Then we figure out the kid." Mara watched as Ben expertly traversed the rope, his heavy boots finding small purchase on the slick wall. He moved with a slow, deliberate confidence which calmed some of the frantic terror in her chest. He made it to the vent and disappeared inside. A moment later, his light appeared in the darkness, and his voice echoed from the tunnel. "It's dry, slopes up a bit. Come on, Mara." Her turn. Mara's heart hammered against her ribs. To let go of their solid platform and dangle over that water, over the place where the cable creeper had vanished, was a primal test of will. She secured the line around her waist, took a deep breath which felt like swallowing ice, and launched herself off the platform. She swung out over the abyss. Her gaze was locked on the vent, on Ben's waiting light. She refused to look down. She could feel the cold radiating from the water below, could imagine the creature's tendrils questing up from the depths. Her hands, numb and clumsy, worked their way along the rope. Ben took up the slack, pulling her in. Her feet finally touched the solid floor of the ventilation shaft, and she scrambled inside, collapsing next to him. The air in the shaft was still and frigid, but it was blessedly free of the wind. It smelled of rust and stale, dead air. The tunnel was a concrete box, extending into darkness beyond the reach of Ben's failing light. Now came the hardest part, Cody. They managed to rig a crude pulley system, looping the tether around a thick conduit pipe inside the vent. But Cody, weak from his injury and terrified, could barely help. The journey across was an agonizing ordeal. He dangled limply, his splinted legs swinging uselessly. Twice his grip slipped, and he was left hanging by the harness under his arms, his cries echoing in the silo. They finally dragged him into the tunnel, a dead weight of shivering misery. They were all inside, safe for the moment. The three of them lay panting in the narrow space, the darkness around them absolute save for the dying glow of Ben's lamp. "Battery's almost gone," Ben said, tapping the casing. The light flickered and dimmed further. "We need to conserve it. We move only when we have to." He switched it off. The darkness which crashed down on them was total. It was a profound, sensory-depriving blackness which Mara had never experienced. There was nothing. No light, no reference points. Just the sound of their own breathing, Cody's quiet whimpers and the cold concrete under her hands. And something else. A whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like the sound of a distant radio signal. A high, thin hiss of a voice. It seemed to come from the very air around them. Mara's head snapped up. "Did you hear that?" "Hear what?" Ben's voice was a disembodied rumble beside her. "A voice," she said, her own voice a strained whisper. It sounded like talking. "It's the pipes, Doc, air moving. This whole place is a giant musical instrument." But it wasn't the pipes. The sound was clearer now, not words, just a cadence, a pleading, desperate tone. Mara pressed her ear against the concrete floor of the tunnel. The sound was stronger there. It was coming from below, from inside the concrete. It was the story Ben had told her. The worker killed in the blowout, the screams from inside the walls. Her scientific mind scrabbled for an explanation. Auditory hallucination, stress-induced paranoia, the hum of the water vibrating through the rock. A sudden, sharp pain lanced through her head, centered behind her eyes. It felt like an ice pick. She gasped, her hands flying to her temples. With the pain came an image, a flash of a memory which was not her own. A circular room, green consoles, the smell of ozone, a man in a blue Air Force uniform, his face pale with sweat, his eyes wide and staring. His hands are shaking as he looks at his partner. Red lights are flashing, a klaxon is blaring. The world is ending. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving Mara dizzy and nauseated. The headache remained, a dull, throbbing pressure. "Mara, you okay?" Ben's hand found her shoulder in the dark. I'm fine," she lied, her voice shaking. "Just a headache." A piercing scream from Cody ripped through the darkness. "Get it off me!" he shrieked, his voice raw with terror. "Get it off!" Ben's light snapped on, its beam now a pathetic, dying orange. Cody was thrashing at his own chest, his hands clawing at his shirt. "There's nothing there, kid," Ben said, grabbing the boy's shoulders. "I can feel it," Cody sobbed, his eyes wild. "It's cold, it's pressing on me, crushing me." He gasped, his back arching. His breath came in ragged, wet pants. "Can't breathe." Mara crawled over, her own terror momentarily forgotten. She saw it then. On Cody's chest, under his wet shirt, a deep purple bruise was forming. It was spreading rapidly, a dark shadow blooming on his skin, its edges perfectly defined, as if an invisible weight was being pressed down on him. His eyes began to bulge, the capillaries turning a frightening red. "What is happening to him?" Mara cried, her medical knowledge useless against this impossible symptom. Ben stared, his face a mask of dawning horror and recognition. "The bends," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Decompression. It's what Granddad said happened to the man on level 7. It made no sense. They were not in a pressurized environment. They had not surfaced too quickly. But the signs were undeniable. Cody was exhibiting the textbook symptoms of a catastrophic decompression event. Cody let out a final, choked gurgle. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose. His body went limp, his head lolling to the side. His eyes were open, staring at the concrete ceiling, but they saw nothing. The deep bruise on his chest was the size of a dinner plate. Mara stared in stunned silence. He was dead, killed by something she could not see, by a force which should not exist. The whispering started again. This time it was not a pleading sound. It was a chorus of faint, hissing voices, swirling around them in the dark tunnel. And this time Ben heard it too. He slowly raised his failing headlamp, its beam cutting a shaky path through the darkness. The light played over Cody's still form, then onto Mara's horrified face. Then he pointed it down the tunnel, into the unexplored black. There was nothing there, just an empty concrete tube, but the whispering grew louder. and in the dying orange glow of the lamp, Mara saw something on the far wall of the tunnel, a flicker, a distortion in the air like heat haze on a summer road. It shimmered, coalesced, and took on a vague, man-like shape. It was translucent, a phantom of pressurized air and agony. It had no distinct features, just a shifting, indistinct form. It was not a ghost of a person, but a ghost of an event. The ghost of a violent, painful death, a Ben's wraith. It drifted toward them, silent and slow. The whispering intensified, the sound of 1,000 agonized last breaths. The air around the apparition grew heavy, the pressure building, a physical force they could feel on their skin. Ben's headlamp gave one final, pathetic flicker and died. They were plunged back into absolute, total darkness, with the body of a boy who had died an impossible death, and with a shimmering, whispering horror that was slowly, silently coming for them. Chapter 4: Echoes in the Dark. The darkness that followed the death of the light was a different entity from the one before. It was not empty. It was occupied. The hissing whispers swirled around them, a vortex of sound in the narrow concrete tube. The pressure on Mara's skin intensified, a physical weight which promised a death of crushed lungs and boiling blood. The shimmering, man-shaped distortion was a searing afterimage burned onto the inside of her eyelids. "Move," Ben's voice was a ragged blade in the black. "Back, the way we came." His hand found her arm, his grip like a steel vise. He pulled her backward, away from the advancing horror. Mara stumbled, her feet tangling with Cody's lifeless body. A wave of nausea and revulsion washed over her. She scrambled away, crawling on her hands and knees over the cold, gritty concrete. "I can't." The silo, she stammered, the logic a desperate anchor. "There's nowhere to go." "There's the shaft we came from," he said, his voice strained as he dragged Cody's body with one arm, pulling Mara with the other. "The main one. We have to go deeper." Deeper. The word was a death sentence. Deeper into the cold, the water, the home of the cable creeper. But the thing in the tunnel behind them was worse. It was a violation of reality itself. They reached the opening of the vent. The vast, open space of the main silo was a different kind of darkness, less confined but infinitely more profound. The rhythmic thump-thump from below was the only landmark in the sensory void. "We can't stay here," Ben panted, the effort of pulling Cody's weight telling in his breath. "It's coming." Mara could feel it. The pressure was building at the mouth of the tunnel, a bubble of impending violence. The whispers were coalescing, sharpening. Ben acted without hesitation. He pushed Cody's body out of the opening. It fell with a sickeningly soft splash into the water 20 feet below, an offering, a distraction. Mara did not have time to protest, to feel the horror of the act. Ben was already pushing her toward the edge. "There's another vent," he said, his voice urgent, right by her ear. "On the other side of the shaft, level 3. I saw it from the platform. It's our only shot." He was talking about a leap of faith into absolute blackness. A swim across a vertical graveyard, guided only by memory and the deep, poolsing sound. "The creeper," she managed, her throat tight. "Better the devil you know," he grunted. He didn't wait for her agreement. He shoved off the edge, his big body hitting the water with a heavy splash. "Come on, Mara, now." The pressure at her back was immense. The whispers were turning into a single, high-pitched scream. She could feel the Ben's wraith right behind her, its horrifying physics ready to unmake her. She closed her eyes and jumped. The cold was a physical blow. It punched the air from her lungs and sent a jolt of pure agony through her system. For a second, she was disoriented, tumbling in the black water. Then her survival instinct took over. She kicked for the surface, breaking through with a desperate gasp. "Ben!" she screamed, the sound swallowed by the immense chamber. Here, his voice came from her left. "Swim for my voice, straight across the shaft. Move." She swam. It was the most terrifying act of her life. Every stroke was a prayer. Her hands, pushing through the frigid water, expected to brush against a metallic tendril, a slick scale, or the cold, dead face of Cody Finch. The water itself felt alive, a hostile entity seeking to drag her down. The thumping from below seemed to get louder faster, a predatory heartbeat excited by their presence. Her outstretched hand scraped against rough concrete. The wall, she had made it across. Up here, Ben's voice was directly above her. He was already clinging to the wall. "Feel for the ledge. The opening is right above it." Her numb fingers found the lip of the vent opening. It was a struggle, a desperate scrabbling against the slick surface. But with Ben reaching down and pulling on the collar of her jumpsuit, she managed to haul herself out of the water and into the relative safety of another concrete tube. They lay there for what felt like an eternity, shivering and gasping, their bodies screaming with the agony of the cold. This new tunnel felt identical to the last. A 4-foot square passage of concrete and steel, disappearing into perfect blackness. "Did it follow?" Mara asked, her voice a reedy tremor. Ben was quiet for a long moment. He was listening, sensing. "No, I don't think it can cross the open water. It's tied to the place it was born, the concrete." The ghost was in the walls. The thought offered no comfort. They had escaped the immediate threat, but they were still trapped in its hunting ground. And they were deeper now. One level closer to the source of the thumping, one level further from the sky. "We need light," Mara said, the statement a raw, desperate plea. "We need a plan." "Plan is simple," Ben replied, his voice grim. "Survive. This vent shaft has to lead somewhere besides the main silo, a maintenance junction, a fan room, somewhere with equipment, somewhere we can find something to make a light. And if it does, then it doesn't." They began to crawl. It was a slow, torturous process. The tunnel was a uniform black. Their only guide was the feel of the concrete under their hands. It was a sensory deprivation nightmare. Time lost all meaning. Every few minutes, Mara's mind would play tricks on her, convincing her she saw a flicker of light ahead, or that the walls were closing in. The headache she'd felt in the LCC returned, a dull ache behind her eyes, accompanied by a low, persistent ringing in her ears. They crawled for what felt like miles. The tunnel began to slope downward, the air growing colder, staler. A new smell reached them, the faint, acrid tang of old oil and decay. "Something ahead," Ben whispered, his crawling slowed. "The air is different." He was right. A draft, faint but noticeable, was flowing against them, and with it a new sound, not the whispers, not the heartbeat, a soft, rhythmic creaking. Kriek sklang, kriek sklang. What is that? Mara whispered back. A fan blade, Ben said, his voice tight with tension. An air handler, it's moving. But the power is out. The draft is turning it. It means we're near a main duct or a service room. They moved forward with extreme caution. The tunnel ended abruptly. Ben, in the lead, stopped so suddenly Mara bumped into his legs. "Great," he announced. "We're at a grate." Mara reached forward, her hands finding the cold, rusted iron bars of a large service grate. It was set into the floor of the tunnel. The creaking sound was louder here, coming from below, accompanied by the smell of decay. "Can you see anything?" she asked. "See anything? Doc, it's darker than the inside of a coffin, but I can feel it. It's a big room down there, a long drop." Ben probed the edges of the grate with his fingers. "It's loose. The bolts have rusted through on this side." He grunted, putting his shoulder into it. With a loud screech of protesting metal, one side of the grate lifted. There, big enough to slip through. He paused, listening to the vast, dark space below. The rhythmic creak of the fan blade was the only sound. "I'm going down," he said. "There's gotta be emergency supplies in a room like this. Flares, batteries, something." "How far is the drop?" "I don't know." He took off his remaining belt, the one he'd used to help her climb. "Lower me down slow. If it's too far, pull me back up." It was a trust exercise in the heart of a nightmare. Mara braced her feet against the sides of the tunnel, the leather of the belt biting into her raw hands as she took Ben's full weight. He descended into the black, his boots scraping against the wall. "Okay, okay," his voice echoed from below. "I feel something, a catwalk, I'm down." The belt went slack. Mara waited, her entire body a knot of tension. The silence was broken only by the kriak, sklang of the unseen fan blade. A minute passed, then another. "Ben," she called out, her voice barely a whisper. No reply. "Ben," she said, louder this time, a thread of panic weaving into her tone. A sudden, explosive crash from below shattered the silence. It was the sound of metal shearing, of something heavy and complex breaking apart. It was followed by a frantic, metallic clattering, and then a heavy splash. Silence. The rhythmic creaking of the fan blade had stopped. "Ben!" Mara screamed, her voice cracking with terror. She scrambled to the edge of the opening, peering into the useless dark. "Answer me." A flicker of light from below. A single, brilliant, eye-searing flash of white. It was a spark, an electrical discharge, and in that split second it illuminated the chamber below. The image was burned into her retina. She saw a vast, cavernous room filled with the hulking shapes of air circulation machinery. She saw a catwalk, a section of which had collapsed, the railing twisted and broken. She saw the surface of a deep maintenance reservoir, its water black and still. And she saw Ben. He was in the water, clinging to the broken edge of the catwalk. And she saw what had broken it. Hanging from the ceiling directly above the catwalk was the cable creeper. In the flash of light, she saw it in perfect, horrifying detail. Its central body was a mass of fused ventilation components and rusted conduits. Its tendrils were made of thick, flexible power cables, each tipped with a claw fashioned from a sharpened fan blade. It was not a creature that had washed into the silo. It was a creature of the silo. It was a part of the machinery, a cancerous, living tumor of the building itself. The light died, plunging her back into darkness. A new sound reached her from below, a wet, thrashing sound, the sound of a desperate struggle in the water, and the low, triumphant clicking of a dozen electrical relays firing in unison. Chapter 5: The Commissary of the Damned. Panic was a cold, constricting serpent around Mara's chest. Her mind screamed at her to flee, to crawl back into the vent and disappear. But the sounds from below, Ben's guttural yells, the violent splashing, the horrifying, wet, tearing noises, held her frozen at the edge of the grate. She was paralyzed by a choice: abandon the only other living person in this hell, or descend into the lair of the thing that made this place its home. Ben, her scream was a raw, useless thing. A new sound cut through the chaos from below, a sharp, metallic clang, followed by a grunt of pain which she knew was not Ben's. Then another clang. The wrench! Ben's voice roared from the darkness, hoarse and strained. "Get back, you bastard!" He was fighting. The realization broke her paralysis. She couldn't leave him. She swung her legs over the edge, her hands gripping the frame of the grate. Her feet searched for the wall, for any kind of purchase. She found a thick bundle of pipes and began to lower herself, her muscles screaming in protest. The drop felt immense, a fall into a bottomless pit. Her feet finally hit the solid steel of the catwalk with a jarring impact. She was down. The fight was happening just a few feet from her in the pitch black. She could hear Ben's labored breathing, the scrape of his boots on the metal walkway, and the slithering, clicking movements of the creeper. She had to do something. Her mind, stripped of all higher function, defaulted to its core programming. Observe, analyze, act, the flash of light, an electrical spark. What had caused it? Ben must have hit something. A power junction, a capacitor. She scrambled forward on her hands and knees, her palms flat on the grated floor of the catwalk, feeling her way. Her hand touched something wet and slick. Water. The broken edge of the catwalk was just ahead. She crawled closer until her fingers brushed against something solid and warm. Ben's leg. "It's on the ceiling," he gasped, his voice tight with effort. "It keeps dropping a line, trying to snag me." Mara could hear the slithering sound directly above them. A cable-like tendril snaked down, its fan blade claw glinting with a faint, residual light. Ben swung the wrench, and the claw retracted with a screech of metal on metal. "The spark," Mara said, her voice low and urgent. "What did you hit?" "Junction box, on the wall," he panted. "Broke open when the platform went." Mara felt along the wall beside the catwalk. Her fingers found a conduit and she followed it until she felt the jagged, sheared metal of a ruined electrical panel. Wires, thick and insulated, spilled from it like intestines. This was it, but it was dead. The silo had no power. Or did it? The thump-thump from the LCC. The rhythmic pulse of energy traveling through the water, through the very structure of the silo. a ghost of power still beating through the building's veins. Was it enough? "Hit it again," she yelled. "Hit the box." Ben needed no more encouragement. He scrambled back, moving beside her. He raised the heavy wrench and brought it down with all his strength on the ruined panel. The result was instantaneous. A brilliant white-blue arc of electricity erupted from the box, illuminating the entire chamber in a strobing, epileptic flash. The creeper, caught in the sudden, blinding light, recoiled, its tendrils pulling back toward its central body with a series of furious clicks. The light lasted only a second, but it was enough. Mara saw their escape route. The catwalk led to a heavy steel door on the far side of the chamber, a pressure door. "The door!" she screamed, grabbing Ben's arm as the darkness slammed back down. "We have to get to the door." They ran. They half crawled, half stumbled along the narrow catwalk, the sound of the enraged creature slithering above them. It was recovering from the shock, its clicks growing louder, more agitated. They reached the door. A heavy wheel, rusted solid, was set in its center. "It seized," Ben yelled, throwing his shoulder against it. It didn't budge. The creeper was moving again. A heavy scraping sound from above told them it was descending, crawling down the wall toward them. "The wrench," Mara pointed at the wheel's locking mechanism. "Use it as a lever." Ben jammed the head of the wrench into the spokes of the wheel. Together, they put their entire weight on it. Mara could feel the muscles in her back and legs straining to their breaking point. The rust fought them, a bond of slow decay which had held for decades. A tendril snaked around Ben's leg, the fan blade claw digging into his calf. He roared in pain but did not let go of the wrench. "Push!" he bellowed, his face contorted in agony. With a deep, groaning shriek of tortured metal, the wheel turned. An inch, then another. The locking pins retracted with a series of loud clicks. Mara grabbed the door handle and pulled. It swung inward, revealing a corridor beyond. She pulled Ben through, his leg dragging, the creeper's tendril still attached. As soon as he was clear, she slammed the heavy steel door shut. The tendril was sheared off, its severed end writhing on the floor like a decapitated snake before dissolving into a shower of rust and sparks. They spun the wheel from the inside, the locking pins ramming home with a satisfying thud. They were safe, for now. They collapsed on the other side, in a corridor which was, impossibly, dry. Ben tore a strip of fabric from his shirt and tied it tightly around his bleeding calf. The wound was deep, 3 parallel gashes weeping dark blood. After a few moments, Mara pushed herself up. Her headache was a raging fire, and the ringing in her ears was louder now. The flash of the electrical arc had done something to her. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Level 4, I think," Ben said, his voice strained. "The air handlers for the barracks and commissary. This should be the crew quarters." They moved down the corridor, Ben leaning heavily on Mara's shoulder. The hallway was lined with doors, their designation placards still legible under a thick layer of dust. Bunk Room A, Bunk Room B, SHOWERS. They found the commissary. It was a larger room with tables and chairs bolted to the floor, exactly as they had been left 50 years ago. A layer of gray dust covered everything, a fine silt of shed concrete and time. The air was still and dead. On one wall, a faded poster of a smiling family enjoying a barbecue offered a surreal and mocking vision of a world which no longer existed for them. A chess board sat on a table, the pieces frozen mid-game. "We need to find a first aid kit," Mara said, easing Ben into a chair. "And light. There has to be an emergency locker." They found one near the small kitchen area. Its door was rusted shut. Ben, despite his injury, smashed the lock with his wrench. Inside, they hit a grim jackpot. There were two heavy-duty flashlights, their plastic casings thick and yellowed with age, a box of road flares, and a comprehensive first aid kit. Mara's hands trembled as she inserted the fat D-cell batteries into one of the flashlights. She slid the switch. Nothing. She tried the other one. She flicked the switch back and forth. Dead. The batteries had long since lost their charge. "No," she whispered, the single word a testament to her crumbling hope. "Try the flares," Ben said, his voice quiet. Mara pulled one from the box. The instructions were simple. Twist cap, strike on cap. She did so. A fizzing sound, a puff of acrid smoke, and then the flare erupted with a blinding, brilliant red glare. The light was a physical shock. It painted the entire commissary in a dancing, demonic crimson. The shadows writhed and leaped. For the first time since the flood, they could see. They could see the thick dust, the corroded metal, the peeling paint, and they could see each other. They were pale, gaunt figures, their faces smeared with grime, their eyes wide and haunted in the bloody light. Mara used the ghastly illumination to clean and bandage Ben's leg. The wound was ugly, but the bleeding had slowed. The flare lasted for 5 minutes. As its light began to sputter and die, a profound sense of dread filled Mara. She did not want to be in the dark again. She lit another. It was while the second flare was burning that she saw it. On the wall behind the serving counter, someone had scratched a message into the paint, using something sharp. It was not old. The scratches were clean, cutting through the 50 years of dust. "It hears the heart. Silence the heart." Below the words was a crude drawing. A stick figure lying on its back. From its chest, a series of lines radiated outward like ripples in a pond. And approaching the stick figure were other, taller figures, their forms indistinct, shimmering. The wraiths. "Ben," Myra said, her voice a croak. She pointed the flare at the wall. Ben stared at the message, his face grim in the red light. The pulse from the LCC, the heartbeat. "It's a beacon," Mara whispered, the realization a cold dread. "It's calling them." The flare sputtered, its light shrinking to a final, defiant ember. As it died, plunging them into darkness once more, a new sound began. It was not the whispers. It was not the clicking of the creeper. It was a soft, scratching sound. It was coming from inside one of the steel lockers which lined the far wall of the commissary. Scratch, scrape, scratch. Someone or something was in the locker, and it was trying to get out. Chapter 6: The Long Pig. The sound from the locker was a wire-thin thread of horror in the absolute blackness. It was a patient, methodical sound. The scrape of a fingernail, perhaps, or a piece of metal, drawn again and again across the inside of the steel door. It was the sound of something wanting out. Ben moved first. He pushed himself to his feet, the wrench a heavy, reassuring weight in his hand. He limped toward the sound, a dark shape against the memory of the flare's red light. Mara fumbled for another flare, her hands shaking so badly she could barely grasp the slim cylinder. The cap was slick with her own nervous sweat. "Don't light it," Ben's voice was a low command from the darkness. "Not yet." He was right. Light would only reveal them. The scratching stopped. A profound silence descended on the commissary, amplifying the sound of Mara's own frantic heartbeat. It was a loud, panicked drum in her ears. "It hears the heart." The words scraped into the wall echoed in her mind. Was that what it was hearing now? Her terror, broadcast like a radio signal. She tried to control her breathing, to slow the frantic pace of her pulse. She pressed her palm against her chest, as if she could physically muffle the beat. A low, guttural click came from the locker. It was not the metallic relay click of the creeper. This was organic, a wet, glottal sound, like a tongue clicking against the roof of a dry mouth. Then a voice. It was a hoarse, desiccated whisper, seeming to seep through the vents of the locker door. "Water." Mara flinched. Ben stood frozen. It was a human voice, or it had been once. It was stretched thin, rasping and dry as autumn leaves. "Water, please," the voice rasped again. "So thirsty." Ben took a step closer. "Who's in there? How did you get here?" A long pause. The only sound was a faint, wet, slobbering noise from inside the locker. "Lost the water. It came, locked myself in, safe in here, but the thirst." Mara's pragmatic mind warred with the primal fear coiling in her gut. A survivor. Another person trapped by the flood. It seemed impossible. How could anyone else have made it this far? "We can't open it," she whispered to Ben, her voice barely audible. "We don't know who or what it is." "It's a person," Ben countered, his own voice low. "We can't just leave them in there to die." His innate decency, a quality Mara had seen in his care for Cody, was a dangerous liability in this new world. "Please," the voice begged, a pathetic, drawn-out whine. "I can hear you breathing. I know you're there. Don't leave me." Ben limped to the locker door. He put his hand on the latch. "I'm going to open it. Stand back." "Ben, no," Mara hissed, scrambling for the flare. It was too late. Ben pulled the latch. It was stiff, but not locked. He pulled the locker door open with a loud metallic groan. For a moment, nothing happened. The interior of the locker was just a deeper patch of black within the black. Then, a shape began to unfold itself from the cramped space. It was a man, or the skeletal remains of one. He was unnaturally tall and thin, his limbs like sticks. He moved with a slow, creaking awkwardness, as if his joints had not been used in a long time. He emerged from the locker and stood to his full height in the darkness, a looming, emaciated silhouette. He was completely naked. "Thank you," the man whispered, his voice still a dry rasp. "The dark, it plays tricks, I heard. A heart, a beautiful, strong heart." Ben took a cautious step back. "Who are you?" "Just a scavenger," the man said. He took a shuffling step forward. "Like you, this place, this silo," she provides if you know where to look, if you know how to listen. Mara's hand closed around the flare. Her thumb found the striker cap. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "What were you scavenging?" Ben asked, his tone hardening. He held the wrench up, a clear warning. The figure chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "Fallen things, forgotten things, protein." He took another step closer to Ben. "Your heart, it beats so fast, like a frightened bird. Hers, too, a symphony." That was the word, symphony. It broke the spell. It was the wrong word, a poetic, predatory observation. Mara twisted the cap. She struck the flare. The crimson light bloomed, flooding the room. The creature standing before them was a monument to starvation. Its skin was a pale, gray parchment, stretched so tight over its bones that it was translucent. Its limbs were elongated, the joints swollen and knobby. It had no hair, no lips, just a bloodless slit of a mouth pulled back over yellowed, pointed teeth. Its eyes were the worst part. They were huge, perfectly round, and completely black like the eyes of a deep-sea fish. There was no white, no iris, just two pits of polished obsidian. And it was not alone. In the flickering red light, Mara saw that the commissary was no longer empty. Other figures, identical to the one from the locker, were emerging from the shadows. They unfolded themselves from behind the dusty tables, from the kitchen pantry, from the open ceiling vents. They were silent, gaunt specters, their black eyes all fixed on the two living, breathing, heart-beating humans. There were at least a dozen of them. The one from the locker, the one who had spoken, hissed as the flare's light hit it, its lipless mouth twisting. "The light, it burns." Ben reacted instantly. He swung the wrench in a wide, desperate arc, aiming for the creature's head. The gaunt thing moved with an impossible, disjointed speed, ducking under the blow. Its long, spindly arms shot out, its fingers, tipped with jagged, dirty nails, latching onto Ben's wounded leg. Ben screamed, a raw sound of pain and fury. The creature twisted and Ben went down hard, his head cracking against the concrete floor. The wrench flew from his hand, skittering across the room. Mara stood frozen for a heartbeat, the flare held out like a useless talisman. Then her adrenaline surged. She threw the flare directly at the face of the creature crouched over Ben. It hit the thing's shoulder with a shower of sparks. The creature shrieked, a high, thin sound like tearing metal, and recoiled, swatting at the hot chemical fire. The other ghouls began to move in, their shuffling steps closing the distance. They were a closing circle of silent, starving predators. Mara scrambled for the wrench. Her fingers closed around the cold steel. She had one chance, not to fight, to run, but she couldn't leave Ben. The first ghoul reached her. It was skeletal, its breath a foul wind of rot and decay. Its black eyes were devoid of anything but a profound, bottomless hunger. It reached for her, its long fingers splayed. Mara swung the wrench. It connected with the side of the creature's head with a sickening, wet crunch. The thing barely seemed to notice. It staggered back a step, a dark, viscous fluid leaking from its ear, but its eyes never left her. Its focus was absolute. Another one grabbed her from behind, its arms wrapping around her in a surprisingly strong grip. Its skin was cold and clammy, like a reptile. The flare on the floor was sputtering. its red light pulsing, casting their struggle in frantic, strobing flashes. Ben was on the ground, the first creature on top of him, its pointed teeth snapping inches from his face. He held it back with his forearms, his muscles straining. They were going to die here, torn apart and consumed in a forgotten storeroom by things which had once been men. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos, a deep, resonant clang that vibrated through the floor, followed by another. It was coming from the corridor they had just come from. The pressure door they had sealed was being struck by something massive. Clang, clang, clang. The ghouls all stopped. Their heads, in perfect unison, snapped toward the sound. The one holding Mara loosened its grip. The one on top of Ben went still, its head cocked, listening. A low chittering sound passed between them, a form of communication that was utterly alien. The thing which had spoken, the leader, hissed a single word: "Warden." With a final, deafening boom, the pressure door flew from its hinges, torn from the wall as if it were made of cardboard. It crashed into the commissary, scattering tables and chairs. Framed in the dark doorway, silhouetted by an unseen light source, was a new horror. It was colossal, filling the entire corridor. It looked like an antique deep-sea diving suit, the kind with a large, spherical brass helmet and a bulky, riveted torso. But it was no machine. It moved with a fluid, organic grace. The suit was a chitinous, armor-plated shell, like that of some immense insect. Its single, large porthole glowed with a soft, internal, bioluminescent green light. Where the arms of the suit should have been, two massive, crab-like pincers clicked and snapped. It stood on two thick, powerful legs which ended in heavy, leaden-weighted feet. This was the depth warden. It had been drawn by the noise. It took a heavy, thudding step into the commissary. Its glowing green porthole swept across the room, a searchlight of cold, alien intelligence. It ignored Mara and Ben completely. Its focus was entirely on the gaunt, gray creatures. The ghouls scattered, their predatory confidence gone, replaced by a primal, instinctual terror. They moved with their unnatural speed, climbing the walls, disappearing back into the vents and shadows from which they came. The leader gave one last, hateful glare at Mara before melting into the darkness. In seconds, the room was empty, save for Mara, the wounded Ben, and the colossal, glowing automaton of chitin and brass. The warden stood motionless in the center of the room, its head slowly panning from side to side. It seemed to be scanning, ensuring the vermin were gone. The last of the flare's light died, plunging the room back into a darkness broken only by the warden's soft, green glow. It took another heavy step, then another, walking past them as if they were nothing more than furniture. It exited the commissary through the other doorway, its heavy footfalls echoing down the corridor until they faded into silence. Mara and Ben were alone again. They were alive. They had been saved, but saved by what? And for what purpose? They had just witnessed a conflict in the silo's dark food chain and learned the terrifying truth. They were not even considered prey. They were simply in the way. Chapter 7: The Ballast of Memory. Silence, when it returned, was a fragile, ringing thing. Mara's ears still hummed with the echoes of the warden's footfalls. Her every nerve was a raw, exposed wire. The darkness was absolute again, save for the ghost of the warden's green glow, a faint phosphor burn on her retinas. She found Ben on the floor, groaning. He was alive. The relief was so profound it almost buckled her knees. "It's gone," she whispered, her voice cracking. "They're all gone." "What? What in God's name was that?" Ben's voice was a strained rasp. The ghoul had reopened the wound on his leg, and his fight had taken what little strength he had left. "I don't know," Mara said honestly. She lit another flare. The sudden red light felt like a shield, but it wasn't interested in us. She helped him to his feet and half-carried him to one of the tables. She unpacked the first aid kit again, her hands moving with a new, grim efficiency. She cleaned his wound, which was deeper this time, and stitched it closed with the suture kit, her geologist's steady hand serving her well. Ben bore the pain with little more than a series of sharp hisses through his teeth. As she worked, her mind raced, trying to assemble the pieces of their nightmare. The silo was not just a flooded structure. It was an ecosystem, a deep, dark, vertical reef with its own terrible food chain. The ghouls, the scavengers, as their leader called them, were at the bottom. The cable creeper was a territorial predator. The Ben's wraiths were a kind of environmental hazard, a psychic residue. And the warden was the apex, the thing which maintained order. "Those things," Ben said, looking at the locker the ghoul had emerged from. "They were men once. You could see it." "I think they're what happened to the original crew," Mara said, her mind making a chilling connection. "The ones who couldn't leave, trapped down here for months, years, without food, without light." "Cannibalism," Ben stated, the word hanging in the red air. "And 50 years of evolution in the dark." The thought was sickening. The silo had not just trapped men. It had remade them into something else, something perfectly adapted to the horrifying new environment. They had to keep moving. The commissary was no longer safe. The ghouls knew they were here, and while the warden had saved them, there was no guarantee it wouldn't crush them underfoot on its next patrol. "The corridor the warden took," Mara said, pointing with the flare. "It must lead somewhere." With Ben leaning on her, they hobbled out of the commissary, leaving the wreckage and the eerie, half-finished chess game behind. The corridor was blessedly straight and clear. The warden's path was obvious. Its heavy, wet footprints marked the dusty floor. They were following the trail of a monster in the hopes it would lead them to salvation. The corridor ended at a spiral staircase, a rusted metal helix which descended into more darkness. "Level 5, Ben said, his voice heavy with dread. "We're going deeper." There was no choice. They began the slow, painful descent, the flare held high. The red light cast their shadows long and distorted on the curved walls. Every creak of the old metal stairs was a gunshot in the silence. The headache behind Mara's eyes was a constant, throbbing companion now. With each level they descended, the pressure, both physical and psychic, seemed to increase, and the flashes were coming more frequently. Not just images, but sounds, feelings. The sharp, acrid smell of burnt wiring, a feeling of profound failure. The face of a young man, tears streaming down his face as he screams, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." She stumbled, her hand flying to her head. "You all right?" Ben asked, his grip tightening on her shoulder. "Just," Dizzy, she lied. She couldn't tell him. He would think she was losing her mind. Maybe she was. The silo was getting into her head, its tragic history seeping into her consciousness like the flood waters. They reached the bottom of the stairs, level 5. This area was different. It was not crew quarters. It was a series of workshops and storage bays, the walls lined with empty racks and workbenches. Heavy machinery sat under dusty tarps, silent and hulking. This was where the missile was maintained. They found a small office, its door slightly ajar. Inside, a metal desk and a filing cabinet stood as silent witnesses to a bygone era. Mara swept the flare across the room. Her eyes landed on a large cork bulletin board on the wall. It was covered in photographs, black and white pictures of the young airmen who had been stationed here. They were smiling, posing with mock bravado next to the missile, playing cards in the commissary, celebrating birthdays with crude, homemade cakes. They were ghosts in silver gelatin, their bright, hopeful faces a stark contrast to the grim reality of their tomb. One face stood out. It was the young man from her vision, the one screaming he was sorry. A small, typed label under the photo read, Airman David Miller, Electronics and Guidance Systems. Miller, she whispered, the name feeling strangely familiar on her tongue. What was that? Ben asked. Nothing. She ran her fingers over the dusty surface of the desk. She found a small, leather-bound book, a journal. She opened it. The handwriting was neat, precise. The first entry was dated 1968. My first shift in the can. The quiet is the loudest thing I've ever heard. LT. Evans says you get used to it. Says you learn to tell the difference between the hum of the recycler and the hum of your own sanity leaving. Mara flipped through the pages. It was David Miller's journal. It was a chronicle of his descent into paranoia and despair in the crushing isolation of the silo. He wrote of the drills, the tension of the Cold War, the psychological strain of living with the apocalypse at his fingertips. And then the entries changed. There's a sound in the walls, not the pipes, a voice. It whispers when the machines are quiet. It knows my name. Evans can't hear it. He says I'm cracking. Mara's blood ran cold. He had heard the wraiths, or their predecessor. She flipped to the last entry. The handwriting was a frantic, barely legible scrawl. The order came. It was real. The checklist, the keys, everything. We were supposed to fly the bird, end the world, but the voice. It was screaming. It showed me pictures, fire, ash, my family. Gone. I couldn't do it. I shorted the guidance panel. 1,000,000 volts, the fire. Evans is dead. It's my fault. The door is sealed. They're never going to open it now. They've buried us. Oh God, they've buried us alive. The whispering is so loud, it's telling me what to do. It's telling me how to make the screaming stop. The journal ended there. Mara looked from the journal to the picture on the wall. Airman Miller had sabotaged the launch. He had saved the world and in doing so had condemned himself and his entire crew to a slow, horrifying death, trapped in the dark. He was the silo's original ghost, its patient zero. A sudden, sharp pain lanced through Mara's temple, brighter and more intense than ever before. The flare fell from her hand, plunging the room into darkness. She collapsed to her knees, a scream locked in her throat. It was not a vision this time. It was a full immersion. She was there, she was him. She is standing in the smoke-filled LCC. The stench of burnt electronics is overwhelming. The body of Lt. Evans is slumped over the console, his uniform blackened and smoking. The klaxons are silent now. The only sound is a high-pitched ringing and the whispers from the concrete. The blast door has sealed with a final terminal thud. She looks at her hands. They are trembling. The whispers are a chorus now. They are telling her that the pain of the world is too great. That the only way to escape the guilt, to escape the box, is to decompress, to let go, to open a valve and let the pressure out, all of it. The whispers promise peace, a final, explosive peace. Mara was ripped back to her own consciousness. She was on the floor of the office, gasping for air, tears streaming down her face. Ben was kneeling over her, shaking her shoulders. "Mara, what's wrong? What happened?" "It's Miller," she choked out, the words tasting of ash. "He's still here, his pain, his guilt. It's what powers the wraiths. It's what this place is." Before Ben could respond, a low groan echoed from the corridor outside. It was not the sound of a creature. It was the sound of the silo itself, the groan of stressed, yielding metal. It was followed by a loud crack like a gunshot that reverberated through the concrete floor. Then another. The whole level shuddered. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. "The structural integrity," Mara gasped, her geologist's mind kicking back in through the fog of psychic trauma. "The flood, the pressure, it's failing. The whole silo is coming apart." The entire structure was a time bomb, and they were trapped in its deepest, darkest chambers. Their race was no longer just against the creatures. It was against the slow, inexorable collapse of their concrete tomb. Chapter 8, the 9th level. The groaning of the silo became a constant, terrifying symphony. It was the sound of a dying leviathan. With each metallic shriek and percussive crack, the structure seemed to settle deeper into the earth. The immense pressure of the floodwaters and the surrounding bedrock finding every microscopic weakness. The air was thick with concrete dust, a choking fog that swirled in the beam of their newly lit flare. "The stairwell is our only way down," Ben said, his voice tight. "If it collapses, we're finished." They abandoned the office and Miller's tragic history, stumbling back into the main workshop. The spiral staircase they had descended looked fragile, its rusted welds trembling with each new shudder of the silo. The thought of going deeper was an act of madness, but the alternative was to wait for the ceiling to crush them. "What's on level 6? Mara asked, her voice strained over the noise. "Storage mostly," Ben replied, his knowledge of the blueprints a flickering candle in the storm. "Fuel tanks for the generators, propellants for the missile, nothing good." They descended with a frantic, reckless speed. The staircase swayed under their weight, bolts shearing from the wall with sharp, rifle-crack sounds. They were halfway down to level 6 when a massive tremor threw them against the central pillar. The section of stairs below them tore away from the wall with a deafening screech of metal and plunged into the darkness below, leaving a 20-foot gap. They were stranded, clinging to the broken staircase between levels. "Now what?" Mara yelled, her heart hammering against her ribs. Ben pointed the flare downward. The beam illuminated a series of thick, insulated pipes running vertically along the silo wall just a few feet from their position. The fuel lines. We can slide down. It was a suicidal, desperate gamble. The pipes were slick with condensation and half a century of grime, but there was no other option. Ben went first, wrapping his arms and legs around a thick black pipe and sliding down into the gloom. Mara followed, the friction burning her gloved hands, her descent terrifyingly fast. She landed hard on the concrete floor of level 6, her legs jarring from the impact. The air here was different. It was thick with the chemical tang of hydrazine and kerosene. The massive, cylindrical fuel tanks dominated the level, their surfaces sweating in the humid air. The groaning of the silo was louder here, amplified by the cavernous, echoing chambers. A network of smaller catwalks connected the tanks. As they navigated the maze, Mara noticed a dark, viscous liquid dripping from the ceiling and running in rivulets down the sides of the tanks. It wasn't water. "The murk," she whispered, recognizing the oily, light-devouring substance from her initial list of potential horrors. She had dismissed it as a scientific curiosity. Now it was a creeping, sentient death, seeping down from the breached levels above. The silo wasn't just collapsing, it was dissolving. They found the next stairwell, this one a solid, concrete affair, and descended past level 7, the level of the original blowout, a place Ben refused to linger, and onto level 8. The tremors were less violent here, the groans of the silo more distant. They were deeper than the main source of the structural failure, but they had traded one danger for another. Level 8 was the abyss. The floor was a heavy steel grate, and below it was the launch pit, the absolute bottom of the silo. The rhythmic thump-thump they had heard since the flood was deafening here, a colossal, resonant heartbeat coming from the blackness directly beneath their feet. "The sump maw," Ben breathed, his face pale in the flare's light. "This is where the water drains." He was right. Looking down through the grate, Mara could see the surface of a vast, churning pool of black water. A slow, steady vortex swirled at its center, a giant plug hole sucking everything downward. The thumping sound was the pressure of that vortex, the pulsing of a monstrous, geological heart. This was the true bottom of the food chain, the thing that consumed all the silos dead. They had to cross the gantry to reach the final access ladder, the one that led down into the launch control systems on level 9. The gantry stretched directly over the maw. With every step, Mara felt the downward pull, a subtle but persistent suction that seemed to tug at the soles of her boots. The air was heavy, charged with a strange, static energy. They were halfway across when the thumping stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise it replaced. The vortex below ceased its swirling. The black water became as still and reflective as polished obsidian. "What's happening?" Mara whispered. "It knows we're here," Ben said, his eyes wide, fixed on the darkness below. A single, massive bubble broke the surface of the water, then another. A low, gurgling sound echoed up from the pit. Then, from the center of the pool, something began to rise. It was not a creature of flesh and bone. It was a part of the silo itself, a horrifying amalgamation of the launch mechanism and some kind of abyssal biological life. A colossal ring-shaped structure, the flame deflector from the base of the silo, rose from the water, but it was covered in a thick, pulsating organic membrane. At its center, where the rocket's fire would have gone, was a single, immense, vertically oriented iris, like that of a goat, the size of a man. It opened slowly, revealing a pupil of absolute, lightless black. The sump maw was not just a drain, it was an eye, and it was looking right at them. A psychic wave, a blast of pure, undiluted terror and despair washed over them. It was not Miller's specific guilt. It was the accumulated agony of the entire silo, the fear of the crew, the hunger of the ghouls, the cold logic of the creeper, all focused into a single, overwhelming force. Mara screamed, clutching her head as the visions flooded her. She saw Cody, his chest caving in. She saw Pip, her body tumbling in the initial flood. She saw the ghouls feasting on the dead. She saw the world ending in a flash of nuclear fire, a vision stolen from Miller's ghost. Ben was on his knees, his face ashen, his hands clamped over his ears as if to block out a physical sound. The eye blinked, a slow, deliberate final gesture. The gantry beneath their feet groaned and then snapped. The metal, weakened by decades of corrosion and the final stress of the collapse, gave way. The world tilted and they were falling. They plunged toward the great dark eye, toward the still black water. This was the end, a final, terrifying descent into the belly of the beast. They hit the water with a violent, icy shock, and the darkness took them. The last thing Mara saw before she was pulled under was the immense, unblinking eye of the silo, waiting to consume them. Chapter 9: The Unsent Message. The black water of the launch pit was not water. It was a thick, viscous fluid, cold and unnervingly slick like oil. It did not churn or resist. It simply absorbed them, pulling them down with a gentle, inexorable pressure. Mara's lungs burned, a familiar fire in the crushing dark, but the psychic assault from the sump maw's eye was gone, replaced by a profound, terrifying quiet. The silo's agonies were silent here, drowned in this primordial soup at the bottom of the world. She was going to die. The thought was not a panic, but a calm, cold certainty. She had survived the flood, the creatures, the ghosts, and the collapse, only to drown in the silo's final, digestive pit. Then a new sensation, a current. It was not the violent pull of the vortex, but a steady, lateral flow. Something was drawing the fluid and them with it toward the concrete wall of the pit. Her outstretched hand bumped against something solid and metallic, the rungs of a ladder, the service ladder for the launch pit. Her fingers clamped around the rung with a strength born of pure animal desperation. She held on, her body a flag in the slow, powerful current. She felt a tug on her leg. Ben. He had grabbed onto her, his own grip a testament to his stubborn refusal to die. Together, they clawed their way up the ladder, rung by agonizing rung, fighting the downward pull of their waterlogged clothes and the relentless current. They broke the surface with ragged, heaving gasps, clinging to the ladder against the pit wall. The great eye was gone, submerged once more beneath the black fluid. The vortex had not returned. They were in a temporary, terrifying reprieve. The ladder, Ben choked out, his voice a raw whisper. It leads up to the level 9 access port. It was their last, impossible chance. Level 9, the lowest and most secure part of the entire complex. The sub-control room for the launch sequence. They climbed. Each foot was a victory. Their muscles screamed, their bodies numb with cold and exhaustion. They finally reached a small, circular platform and a heavy, watertight hatch set into the wall. A single, small porthole of thick, yellowed plexiglass was set in its center. Ben spun the wheel. It was stiff, but it moved. With a final, groaning sigh of equalizing pressure, the hatch swung inward. They tumbled through the opening, landing in a heap on a grated metal floor, and slammed the heavy door shut behind them. They were on level 9. The room was small, circular, and starkly utilitarian. It was a secondary control station, a place of last resort. A single console stood against the far wall, more compact than the one in the LCC, its screens dark, its switches inert. The air was dry and blessedly free of the dust and decay of the upper levels. This chamber had been hermetically sealed. Mara pushed herself up, her body a single, throbbing bruise. She looked back at the hatch. Through its small, grimy porthole, she could see the still, black surface of the launch pit. They had climbed out of the silo's stomach. A single light was active in the room, a small, red indicator on the communications panel of the console. It blinked with a slow, steady pulse. "Stand by." "Is that power?" she asked, her voice filled with a fragile Chinese letter believe wonder. Ben limped over to the console. He ran his hand over the panels, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. Emergency power. A closed system, completely isolated from the main grid, probably a plutonium battery, designed to last 100 years. It would only power the most critical systems. "Like what?" "Life support," he said, pointing to a small vent near the floor. A faint, clean stream of air was flowing from it. "And communications." He tapped the screen above the blinking red light. It flickered to life, bathing the room in a soft, green glow. A command prompt appeared on the screen. "Secure ULF channel. Stand by for authentication." "Ultra-low frequency," Mara breathed. "It bypasses the main antennas. It can transmit directly through bedrock. They could talk to command even after a direct hit." It was a message in a bottle, a way to speak to the world they thought they had lost forever. Hope, a feeling so alien it was almost painful, surged through her. Ben's fingers, surprisingly nimble for their size, flew across the keyboard. He bypassed the authentication prompts, his old-school demolition knowledge of military-grade systems paying off. A new screen appeared, a simple text interface. "Ready input message. End with EOF //." They could send a message, an SOS their location, a call for help. Ben began to type. "Mayday. Survivors trapped in Titan II Silo 4B immediate rescue NEADED." Mara watched, her heart pounding. Rescue. The word was a miracle. But as Ben typed, the headache behind Mara's eyes returned with a vengeance. It was not the dull, psychic ache from before. It was a sharp, piercing spike of agony, as if Miller's ghost was personally trying to claw its way out through her skull. The visions came, fast and uncontrolled. The fire in the LCC, the smell of burning flesh, the screams, the crushing guilt, the whispers telling him it was his fault, that he had failed, that he had doomed them all. And then a new vision, not of the past but of the present. She saw the silo not as a human saw it, but as a schematic of pain. She saw the wraiths swirling on the upper levels, drawn by the psychic wound of Miller's sabotage. She saw the creeper, a knot of angry, corrupted machinery patrolling its vents. She saw the ghouls, pockets of primal hunger stirring in the dark. And she saw the sump maw, the great, cold intelligence at the bottom, the ballast which kept all the silo's misery in balance. She understood. The silo was not just a structure, it was a ghost, a single, massive, complex entity of pain. Miller's act of sabotage had been its birth. The flood had been its awakening. And the power, the life support of Level 9, was its heart. The emergency battery was keeping the entire, horrifying ecosystem alive. The message, the SOS, if they sent it, people would come. They would drill from the surface. They would pump the water out. They would open the tomb. And in doing so, they would release the things inside. The wraiths, the creeper, the ghouls, the psychic contagion of the silo itself. They would not be saving themselves. They would be unleashing a plague upon the world. The very thing Airman Miller had died to prevent. "Ben, stop," she gasped, clutching her head, the pain blinding her. He turned from the console, his face etched with confusion. "What? I'm almost done." "You can't send it," she said, the words tasting like poison. "We can't let them open this place. Ever." "Mara, what are you talking about? It's our only way out." "There is no way out," she screamed, the voice of Miller, of the silo itself, mingling with her own. "This place is a sickness. If it gets out, it will spread. We are the quarantine." Ben stared at her, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning horror. He saw the madness in her eyes, the echo of the silo's ghosts. He thought she had finally broken. He turned back to the console, his fingers poised over the keyboard. "I'm sending it, Mara." "No." The wrench. It was still in his belt. Mara moved without thinking, her actions guided by the desperate, protective instinct of the silo itself. She lunged for it, pulling the heavy tool from his belt. Ben reacted, grabbing her wrist. They struggled, a desperate, clumsy fight in the green glow of the console. They were not fighting each other. They were fighting for the fate of two different worlds, the one outside and the one trapped within the concrete walls. Ben was stronger. He forced her back, his face a mask of grim resolve. "I'm sorry," he panted. He turned to the keyboard to type the final command. In that split second, Mara, with a final surge of strength, swung the wrench not at him, but at the console. The heavy steel head smashed into the screen. It imploded with a shower of green sparks and a final, dying hiss. The room was plunged into darkness, the only light the faint, mocking red standby button. The link to the outside world was severed. Forever. They stood in the echoing silence, two survivors at the bottom of a grave, the ghost of a dead airman their only witness. They had survived, but they had not escaped. And the silo, its heart still beating, its secrets now safe, was finally, truly their tomb. Chapter 10: The Caretakers. The darkness that followed the destruction of the console was a heavy, final thing. It was the darkness of a sealed coffin. The silence was absolute, the last echo of their struggle fading into the cold, recycled air. The blinking red light was a single, malevolent star in their private universe. Ben did not speak for a long time. Mara could hear his breathing, a ragged, defeated sound. The flare was gone, lost in the scuffle. The wrench was a cold, heavy weight in her hand. It was the only thing in this new world which felt real. "You killed us," Ben finally said, his voice flat, devoid of anger, filled only with a hollow emptiness. "You killed us both." "I saved them," Mara replied, her voice a whisper. She was not sure if she meant the people on the surface or the ghosts within the silo. Perhaps they were one and the same. The silo was quiet. The groaning and cracking from the upper levels had ceased. The structural collapse had stabilized, the floodwaters settling into a new, grim equilibrium. With the destruction of the console, the psychic pressure in Mara's head receded, leaving behind a dull, hollow ache, like the ghost of a phantom limb. The presence of David Miller was gone, his final, desperate act of quarantine complete. They were the new caretakers, the last two missileers assigned to a different kind of watch. Days bled into a timeless, featureless gray. They had breathable air from the still-functioning life support. They had a source of pure, filtered water from the system's condensation traps. They had no food, but in the profound cold and darkness of Level 9, their metabolism seemed to slow, their hunger a distant, gnawing ache rather than a frantic demand. They explored their tiny kingdom. Level 9 was a self-contained unit. It had a small barracks with 2 bunks, a chemical toilet, and a locker filled with vacuum-sealed silver mylar blankets. They wrapped themselves in the crinkling sheets, 2 silent, metallic figures in the dark. They did not speak of what Mara had done. There were no words for it. It was an act which existed outside the bounds of the world they had known, an act of terrible, necessary sacrifice, or an act of profound, unforgivable madness. They lived in the space between those two truths. Sometimes in the long stretches of silence, Mara would place her hand on the cold concrete wall. She could feel it, a faint, almost imperceptible thrumming. The silo was asleep, its nightmares quiescent. The sump maw was dormant, the creeper motionless in its vents, the ghouls hiding in their dark corners. The wraiths were quiet, their psychic screaming soothed by the silence of the heart. They were the silence. Their continued, quiet existence was the new seal on the tomb. One day Ben spoke, his voice rusty from disuse. "Do you think they'll ever find this place?" Mara thought of the world above, of the sun, the wind, the sky. It all seemed like a story she had read in a book a long time ago. "Yes," she said, "someday, 100 years from now, 1,000, someone will find the silo, they'll drain it. They will find our bones. They will read the warnings we scratch into the walls." She had taken a piece of sharp metal from the broken console. Every day, she would scratch a message onto the steel door of their chamber. "Do not open. The sickness is inside. Let the silence hold." Ben was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "We should have a chess game to pass the time." Mara almost smiled. The board in the commissary frozen mid-game, a symbol of an interrupted world. Their game would be different. It would be a game with no interruptions, a game with all the time in the world. They found loose bolts, scraps of wire, and pieces of broken plastic. In the absolute darkness, working only by touch, they fashioned a crude chess set. They drew a board on the floor with a piece of chalky stone. And so they began their watch. Two lone figures in a 9-story tomb, surrounded by sleeping monsters and the ghosts of a forgotten war. Their only light was the single, red, unblinking eye of the dead console. Their only sound was the scrape of their makeshift chess pieces on the concrete floor, and the slow, steady beat of their own two hearts, a rhythm which held the darkness at bay. They were the keepers of the silence, the last guardians of the concrete sarcophagus, their long game just beginning. The end.